My therapist, the one the company makes you see before they send you to the end of the world, she called it situational detachment. It sounded professional, expensive. All it really meant was that I was good at leaving. I could pack my life into 2 duffel bags and a hard case, and I could walk away from a place, a person, a whole life without looking back. It's what made me good at the job. Logistics coordinator for remote assignments, a fancy title for a guy who moves things in places nobody wants to go. This time, it was Antarctica, the big one, the last real blank spot on the map. The contract was for 1 year at McMurdo Station, but the real money, the bonus that made the year of frozen isolation worth it, was for a side job, a 4-week solo traverse out to a ghost facility called Polaris 6. It was an old geological outpost from the 80s, long since abandoned. My job was simple: get there, conduct a full inventory of every piece of equipment left behind, tag it for removal, and get back. A glorified moving job, just the way I liked it. Simple, methodical, and quiet. They flew me in on a C-130 Hercules, a big, ugly bird that felt like a cargo container with wings. For hours, there was nothing but the drone of the engines and the endless, blinding white of the ice sheet below. When we landed, the cold was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't like regular cold. It was a physical presence. It stole the air from your lungs and made your teeth ache. McMurdo was a strange place, a chaotic collection of prefab buildings huddled together against the elements, a little splash of color and industry in a world of white. It was loud, full of scientists and support staff, all bundled up so you could only see their eyes. And I didn't care to get to know any of them. I was a contractor, a temporary ghost. I kept my head down, did my orientation, and focused on prepping my vehicle, a Tucker's Snowcat, a big, ugly orange box on 4 massive tracks. It would be my truck, my office, and my home for the next month. My handler was a man named Fitzpatrick. Weathered face, tired eyes. He'd been on the ice for a dozen seasons. He walked me through the mission parameters one last time in the noisy logistics hangar. Your comms check is at 8000 and 2000 hours every day, no exceptions, he said, his voice flat over the noise of a nearby forklift. You missed 2 in a row, we send a search party. The traverse is plotted and locked in your nav system. Do not deviate. There are crevasse fields out there that'll swallow that whole damn rig and we'd never find you. Understood, I said. He handed me a heavy-duty tablet. The inventory software is on here. Every item at Polaris needs a tag, a photo, and a condition report. Every screwdriver, every broken chair. They want a full accounting. Why? I asked, more out of habit than curiosity. Why not just leave it all to be buried? Fitzpatrick shrugged, looking away for a second. Well, environmental protocols. They want the continent left the way we found it. Plus, Polaris was shut down in a hurry. The paperwork from back then is a mess. This is just corporate spring cleaning. It sounded plausible enough. I didn't press it. The less I knew, the better. My job was to count boxes, not ask questions. A week later, I was rolling out of McMurdo. The noise and the chaos of the station faded behind me until it was just a smudge in my rearview mirror. Then, nothing. Just the low growl of the Snowcat's engine, the crunch of the tracks on the hard-packed snow, and a horizon that was a perfect, unbroken line separating the white ground from the pale blue sky. The solitude was absolute. It's what I came for. Out here, there were no expectations, no complicated relationships, no ghosts from my past life. There was only the mission. Drive, eat, sleep, check in, repeat. The landscape never changed. It was beautiful, in a brutal, indifferent sort of way, a world scrubbed clean of everything but the essentials. The journey to Polaris 6 took 5 days. On the 5th day, the nav system beeped. A single dark shape appeared on the horizon. As I got closer, it resolved into a collection of low, dome-like structures, half buried in snowdrifts. It looked like a forgotten moon base. There was a single skeletal radio mast pointing a crooked finger at the sky. I pulled the snowcat to a halt about 100 yards away and just looked at it. The silence was overwhelming. My engine was the only sound in the world. There was no wind, no birds, nothing, just the dead silence of a place that had been left behind. Fitzpatrick was right. It felt like they left in a hurry. A heavy-duty canvas was still draped over a crate near the main entrance, frozen solid and flapping weakly in the breeze I couldn't even feel. I suited up, my breath misting in the frigid air, and stepped outside. The cold was sharper here, more intense. The main airlock door was unlocked. I pulled the heavy lever, and it scraped open with a groan of protesting metal. The air that rushed out from inside was stale, dry, and colder than the air outside. I stepped inside, my headlamp cutting a sharp white beam through the darkness. Everything was covered in a delicate layer of frost. Desks, chairs, computer terminals from a bygone era, all silent and white. It was a tomb, a perfectly preserved relic of a time when this place was alive with people and purpose. I ran a gloved hand over a desk, disturbing a decade of ice crystals. My job was to catalog the dead. Simple enough. I unslung my pack, pulled out the tablet, and took the first picture. Item number 1. One office chair. Condition, poor. The work had begun. For the first 2 days, that's all it was. A boring, methodical job in a frozen tomb. I created a routine. 8 hours of inventory, eat a freeze-dried meal, 8 hours of sleep and the relative warmth of my snowcat. On the 3rd day, the storm hit, and that's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A sound from under the ice.
The storm came without warning. The sky, which had been a sheet of dull gray, turned a bruised purple-black in less than an hour. The wind, which had been absent, arrived with the fury of a freight train. It screamed past the thin walls of the station, and fine powdery snow began to force its way through invisible cracks in the window seals, creating tiny, shimmering dunes on the floor. My comms unit crackled with a clipped warning from McMurdo, a level 1 storm, total whiteout conditions, all travel and outdoor activities suspended indefinitely. I was trapped. I retreated to the snowcat for the first night of the storm, feeling the big vehicle rock on its tracks as the wind hammered it. Sleep was impossible, but it wasn't the storm that kept me awake. It was the sound. It had started as a feeling more than a sound, a low-frequency vibration I felt in the fillings of my teeth and the bones of my chest while I was working in the station's main lab. I'd dismissed it as the storm or the station settling or just my own mind playing tricks on me in the oppressive silence. But now, back in the snowcat, I could still hear it. Faintly, through the howl of the wind, there it was. A pulse. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, incredibly regular and deep. It was a sound that felt ancient, like the beat of a heart the size of a mountain. The next day, the storm was even worse. Going outside was suicide. That meant I was stuck inside the station. I told myself it was a good opportunity to get more work done. I tried to focus on the inventory, on the familiar, mindless task of tagging and photographing. One ergonomic keyboard, circa 1985. Condition, fair. But the sound was still there, a constant subliminal companion. It was clearer inside the station, and it seemed to be coming from the floor, from the ice itself. Driven by a mix of boredom and a growing, gnawing unease, I abandoned the inventory and started my own search. The station was a circular design, a central hub with 3 spokes leading to the lab, the barracks, and the comms center. The sound was strongest in the central hub. It was a large, open area, and in the middle of the floor was a heavy circular steel plate about 6 feet in diameter, held down by massive bolts. A maintenance hatch for the station's foundation, I assumed. I spent the rest of the day in the station's small office, looking for blueprints or records, anything that might explain the hatch. What I found instead was the station chief's logbook, left on a desk as if he'd just stepped out for a coffee. The last entry was dated July 17, 1989. For the final 2 weeks of entries, the chief's neat scientific handwriting grew frantic, almost illegible. He wrote about equipment malfunctions, strange magnetic readings, and what he called auditory hallucinations among the crew. Then I saw the redacted lines. Whole paragraphs were crossed out with thick black permanent marker. The censorship was crude, angry, but they missed a few words. In one entry, I could make out the phrase, "The VLF echoes are not random," and in the very last entry, just before a huge blotch of ink, were the words, "We shouldn't have drilled so deep. We woke something up." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled down my spine. I closed the logbook, the soft thump of the cover echoing in the dead silent room. My own heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic counter-rhythm to the slow, steady pulse coming from below my feet. My simple inventory job, my corporate spring cleaning, was a lie. Fitzpatrick's casual shrug, the messy paperwork, it was all a deliberate cover. I wasn't here to clean this place up. I was here to... what? Confirm something? I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, and the game board was a frozen, abandoned station at the bottom of the world, miles from another living soul. And whatever the game was, the next move was under that steel hatch in the floor.
My training, my instincts, everything that had kept me safe and employed in godforsaken places like this for the last 10 years screamed at me to leave it alone, to lock the office, go back to my snowcat and wait out the storm. I should focus on the job I was paid to do. I should count the boxes, tag the equipment, and pretend the floor wasn't breathing with a slow, steady heartbeat. That's what the smart miles would do, the professional miles. But the man who'd read that logbook, the man who was now utterly, terrifyingly alone with a secret that had been buried for 30 years, he couldn't let it go. The curiosity was a physical itch under my skin. The redacted lines in that logbook weren't just missing information, they were a challenge, a puzzle laid out in a frozen tomb. And the pulse felt like a question being asked directly to me. The storm gave me my excuse. I couldn't leave. I couldn't work. I couldn't even call McMurdo to report my findings. The blizzard was causing so much atmospheric interference that my comms unit was useless for anything but static. I was in a bubble, and the only way out was through. The hatch was the only thing in the world that mattered. The bolts were massive, hexagonal heads, rusted even in the dry, cold air. They were sealed with ice and time. I spent hours in the station's workshop, a ghost town of well-preserved tools, looking for what I needed. I found a heavy-duty torque wrench with a socket that looked about right and a canister of de-icing lubricant. My hands ached from the cold as I worked, my breath pluming in the beam of my headlamp. Each bolt was a battle. I'd spray the lubricant, wait, and then throw my entire body weight onto the wrench, grunting with the effort. The screech of protesting metal as a bolt finally gave way was a gunshot in the silence. There were 8 of them. It took me the better part of a day, a long, grueling, methodical process. All the while, the pulse seemed to get stronger, clearer, as if it was encouraging me. Thump, thump, thump. It was no longer just in my chest. It was in the air, a low thrumming that vibrated the very floor I was working on. This wasn't a hallucination. It was real. With the final bolt loosened, the hatch itself was still too heavy to lift. I had to go back to the workshop and rig up a small manual chain hoist to one of the ceiling girders directly above it. It was the kind of problem-solving my job was actually about, using the tools at hand to move something impossibly heavy. As I hooked the chains to the hatch's recessed handle, I had to laugh. I was finally doing my job. I was moving a piece of inventory. The hatch lifted, groaning, revealing not the concrete foundation I expected, but a perfect black circle of nothing. It was a shaft, a deep, wide, perfectly bored shaft descending into the ice. There was no ladder, no stairs, just smooth, dark walls that seemed to absorb the light from my headlamp. A cold, different from the ambient temperature of the station, rose from its depths. It was a dead, ancient cold. I leaned over the edge, my heart pounding, and shined my light down into the abyss. The beam couldn't find the bottom. It just faded into the oppressive darkness. But it did illuminate something else. Bolted to the side of the shaft, just below the opening, was a small metal platform with a control panel, a winch, and connected to it a single, thin steel cable that descended, impossibly, into that endless night below. It wasn't a maintenance hatch. It was an elevator, a private, one-way ticket to whatever they had woken up.
For a long time, I just stood at the edge, staring down into that impossible blackness. Every rational thought was a warning siren. This was insane. I wasn't an explorer. I was a logistics guy. My job description included risk assessments for frostbite and heavy lifting, not descending into a mysterious abyss on a 30-year-old piece of machinery I couldn't even properly inspect. The cable could snap, the motor could fail. I could simply descend into a pocket of unbreathable air and die in the dark. But the alternative was to do nothing, to close the hatch, sit in my snowcat, and wait for the storm to pass, all while knowing that this thing was down there. To go back to McMurdo and file my report, leaving out the part about the station having a heartbeat? I couldn't do it. The secret was a hook, and it was in deep. Whatever was at the bottom of that shaft was the answer to the question the logbook had asked, and the slow, steady pulse felt less like a threat and more like an invitation, a patient, weeding presence. The control panel for the winch was surprisingly simple, a single large lever, up, down, and neutral. An emergency brake button, coated in a film of ice, looked less than reliable. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and stepped onto the small, grated platform. It swayed slightly under my weight. I gave the cable a hard tug. It seemed solid enough. It would have to be. I pushed the lever to the down position. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud clank and a shudder that vibrated through my boots, the winch engaged. The platform lurched, and I began to sink. The circle of light from the station above me grew smaller, and the darkness below remained absolute. I was a spider, descending on a single thread of silk into the heart of a frozen world. The descent was agonizingly slow. The walls of the shaft were a few feet from the edge of the platform, a scrolling library of geological time. My headlamp revealed layers of compressed snow, ancient volcanic ash, and bubbles of air trapped for millennia. It was mesmerizing. I was moving backwards through history. 10 feet, 100 feet, 1,000. The light from the station was now just a pale, distant star above me. The sign of the storm was completely gone. The only sounds were the groan of the winch motor far above and the all-encompassing thump, thump, thump of the pulse. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a pressure wave. I could feel it in my bones, resonating with my own nervous system. Down, down, down. My altimeter watch, a piece of kit for traversing mountains, was the only way I could track my progress. 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet. The temperature had dropped even further, but the air was still and dry. The ice on the walls changed. It was no longer cloudy with trapped air, but had become perfectly, unnaturally clear, like polished black glass. It reflected my headlamp beam back with a strange, deep blue intensity.
At nearly 3,000 feet below the surface, the platform began to slow. The winch motor's groan changed pitch, and with a final gentle bump, the platform came to a halt. I had arrived. I swept my headlamp beam around. I was at the bottom of the shaft, which opened up into a space so vast my light couldn't find the walls or the ceiling. I wasn't in a cave. Caves are made by water and rock. This was different. The floor was a perfectly flat, dark, obsidian-like material, not even ice. It wasn't even cold to the touch. I stepped off the platform, my boots making no sound on the strange surface. The pulse was everywhere now, a silent, powerful rhythm that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. I turned in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings in the disorienting darkness. That's when my light caught it. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a wall, and in the wall, there was a doorway.
The doorway was not a door. There was no frame, no hinges, no mechanism to open or close it. It was simply a perfect, tall rectangle of absolute blackness cut into the wall. It was an absence of material. Hesitantly, I reached out a gloved hand. My fingers passed to the threshold from the cold air of the cavern into something else. The air inside was warmer, not by much, but enough to register. It was perfectly still. I took one last look back at the faint light of my elevator platform, my only connection to the world above, and stepped through. I was in a corridor, but the word feels wrong. The floor was the same smooth black material, but the walls were different. They weren't flat. They were gently curved, and the surface was covered in what looked like dormant geometric circuitry that absorbed my headlamp's beam, leaving no reflection. There were no lights, no sounds other than the pulse, which was now a palpable presence, a deep thrum that seemed to flow through me, calming my frantic heart. It felt like the structure itself was breathing, and I was inside its lung. I followed the corridor, my hand trailing along the strange, cool wall. There was only one path. It sloped gently downwards, winding in a slow, hypnotic spiral. I lost all sense of direction. The air was clean, sterile, with a faint metallic scent like the air after a lightning strike. The silence between each pulse was the most profound quiet I have ever experienced. It was the silence of a place that had been waiting, undisturbed, for eons. As I walked, something strange began to happen. With each pulse that washed through me, a fleeting image would flash behind my eyes, a field of red grass under a purple sky, a city made of impossibly thin, glowing spires, a sky filled with two suns. They were not memories. They were not dreams. They were echoes, fragments of something alien, something ancient. The pulse wasn't just a sound. It was a broadcast, and my own mind was the receiver. And it wasn't hostile. It was inquisitive, lonely. The corridor finally opened out, and I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I had entered a chamber so immense that the concept of a room was meaningless. The darkness was absolute. My headlamp's beam, which had seemed so powerful before, was now a pathetic little spear of light, unable to find the ceiling or the far walls. I was standing on the edge of an interior ocean of blackness, and in the center of it all, suspended in the void, was the source of it all. It wasn't a machine, and it wasn't a creature. It was both. It was a massive central core, dozens of feet across, made of the same dark material as the walls, but it was interwoven with a crystalline structure that pulsed with a soft, internal blue-white light. The light was the source of the beat. With every thump, a wave of light would emanate from the core and travel through the crystalline veins. Delicate web-like appendages, some as thin as wires and others as thick as tree trunks, extended from the central mass, connecting to the floor and disappearing into the darkness above. It was organic and geometric, living and built. It was the heart of this place. The pilot, the engine, the prisoner. I didn't know. All I knew was that it was alive. And after 30 years of silence, it knew I was here.
I stood there for an amount of time that had no meaning, my headlamp a useless pinprick of light in the face of this immensity. Fear was a distant echo. My primary feeling was a profound, bone-deep sense of awe. I had an insane urge to turn off my headlamp, to just stand in the pure darkness and watch the soft, blue-white light pulse through the creature's crystalline veins. I lowered my light, letting the beam drop to the floor, and the chamber was plunged into a soft twilight, illuminated only by the entity itself. As soon as I did, the communication changed. The fleeting images I'd experienced in the corridor were gone, replaced by something far more powerful and coherent. It wasn't a voice in my head, it was a torrent of pure understanding, a flood of memories that were not my own, poured directly into my consciousness. I saw a journey, not through space as I understood it with ships and engines, but a silent, graceful sailing through the currents of the cosmos. I saw this being, this vessel, as a seed, a repository of knowledge and life, traveling from a star system so ancient it had long since burned out. It was an archivist, a cartographer, a wanderer. The feeling that came with these images was one of infinite peace, of purpose, of a timescale that made all of human history seem like a single heartbeat. Then, the peace was shattered. The vision changed. I was shown the reason for the crash, the reason for this hiding place. It was being hunted. The pursuer was not a ship, not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a void, an intelligent, geometric darkness that consumed light and life. It was a predator that hunted not for food, but for knowledge, for patterns, absorbing civilizations and memories, leaving only silence in its wake. I felt the vessel's terror and desperation as it was chased across galaxies. I saw it make a final desperate choice. It saw Earth, a young, chaotic world teeming with primitive life, but shielded by a powerful magnetic field and a deep insulating layer of ice at its pole, a perfect place to hide. It plunged into the atmosphere, a controlled crash, burying itself deep within the planet's crust, severing its connection to its own power to go silent, to go dark. It was a self-imposed coma, a desperate gamble to wait until the hunter had passed. It showed me the long sleep, millennia blurring into one another, the slow, grinding weight of the ice sheet above, the rise and fall of ice ages, the faint, fleeting thoughts of the planet's new, noisy consciousness, humanity, flickering on the surface like fireflies. And then, a sudden, sharp pain, a violation. The tiny, insistent prick of a drill bit from the surface, the scientists of Polaris 6 in the 1980s. They had accidentally pierced its dormant shell. It had woken, disoriented and weak, and its faint, confused energy signature had terrified the men above, causing them to flee. Then silence again. 30 more years of waiting, of slow, patient healing, until me. It showed me my own journey. It had felt my approach from McMurdo, a single conscious mind, different from the panicked static of the first scientists. It had gently pulsed, a quiet question, into the ice. It felt my curiosity, not my fear. I had opened the door. I had come down willingly. I was the first being in millions of years to stand before it with a mind open enough to listen. The flood of information subsided, leaving me breathless and shaking in the blue twilight. The pulse continued, steady as a drum, but now it felt different. It was no longer a question. It was a plea.
I stood on that silent, obsidian floor, the universe redrawn inside my head. The raw data of the entity's memories, the terror, the loneliness, the sheer crushing weight of time settled into the quiet corners of my mind. It was a burden of knowledge I could never have imagined. I was no longer Miles Corrigan, logistics coordinator. I was an accomplice to a secret millions of years old, a witness. I felt an absurd sense of responsibility, as if I'd stumbled upon a sacred text and was now its sole guardian. My small, detached life, my 2 duffel bags and a hard case, seemed like a joke in the face of this reality. The flood of memories receded, leaving behind a single resonant feeling. The plea. It wasn't a word, not a request spoken in a language, but a pure conceptual need. It was the feeling of a hibernating animal that fears its den is about to be discovered, the feeling of a refugee holding their breath as soldiers walk past their hiding place. It wanted to remain hidden, to finish its long, slow healing, to sleep. But it knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it was no longer safe. The humans who had found it once would eventually come again. The trail of breadcrumbs left by the 1989 expedition was still there, waiting in archives and databases for someone smart enough or curious enough to follow. The communication gently resumed, but it was different now. It was a true dialogue. It seemed to understand that I had processed its history, and now it was showing me the specifics of its problem. It guided my own thoughts, showing me how to focus my intent into a question. What do you need me to do? The question wasn't spoken, I just thought it, directing the thought towards the vast, pulsing heart of the chamber. The answer came as another wave of understanding, a blueprint of a plan laid out in my mind. The entity, which I now thought of as the archivist, had a subtle but profound connection to the station above. The power conduits, the wiring that ran down to the deep Earth sensors the original geological team had installed. They were all like a crude nervous system. Through them, the archivist could feel the station's network. It showed me what it had learned. Every piece of data from Polaris 6 had been backed up. The censored logbook in my hand was just a physical relic. The real danger lay in a climate-controlled server room, thousands of miles away, managed by the Antarctic Research Program. More images flooded my mind. I saw a server rack labeled USAP Archive 7. I saw file structures, folder names flickering past, Polaris _VI6 geodata 1988, Polaris VI6 drillcore 1989. The files were encrypted, forgotten, but not deleted. They were a loaded gun waiting in a drawer. The archivist then showed me something else, something physical. Deep freeze storage lockers back at McMurdo. In one of them, encased in ice, were the original drill cores from the 1989 expedition. The microscopic, fossilized organisms found within them, organisms not of this Earth, had been the source of the crew's panic. The evidence was all there. The plan it proposed was audacious. It needed me to become a ghost in the machine, to go back to McMurdo and, using my access as a logistics coordinator, erase the trail. I saw a schematic of the McMurdo network. The archivist highlighted the blind spots, the security loopholes. It showed me how my own data tablet, the one that Fitzpatrick had given me, could be used to access the network from a maintenance terminal. It showed me the location of the drill core storage, a low-priority section of the station I could access with my clearance level under the guise of a routine inventory check. You want me to delete the files? Destroy the cores? I thought, the scale of the request settling on me. This was espionage. It was sabotage. It was a federal crime, probably dozens of them. The feeling that came back was not one of command, but of somber necessity. They are echoes. Echoes attract attention. The hunter listens for echoes. I understood then. The hunter, The void that had chased it across the galaxy was still out there, and a sudden burst of data, a rediscovery of this anomalous life form, might be like a flare fired in the dead of night. It could bring the hunter here, and the archivist showed me what that would mean. It showed me the hunter consuming another world, a planet of crystalline beings. It didn't involve fire or explosions. The world just stopped. Its light, its energy, its consciousness were unwritten from the universe, absorbed into the silent geometric darkness. The plea wasn't just for itself, it was for Earth. I took a step back, my boots scuffing silently on the alien floor. My entire life had been about minimizing risk, about following the manifest, about signing the forms and getting the job done as quietly as possible. Now I was being asked to take the greatest risk imaginable on behalf of a being I had met an hour ago. For a moment, the weight was too much. "I'm just a guy who moves boxes," I whispered, the sound of my own voice shockingly loud in the vast chamber. The archivist responded not with images, but with a feeling. It projected a sense of my own history back at me. It showed me my skill for navigating complex systems, for seeing loopholes in shipping manifests and supply chains. It showed me my ability to be overlooked, to be the person in the background that no one pays attention to. It wasn't judging me. It was telling me that the very things that had made my life small and insignificant were the things that made me the perfect person for this job. I wasn't a soldier or a scientist. I was a ghost, and it needed a ghost. A strange sense of calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The detachment I had cultivated for my entire career, the ability to leave things behind without a second thought, was no longer a weakness. It was a tool. I could do this. I had to. Okay, I thought, focusing all my will into the single word. I will do it. I will erase the echoes. A wave of what I can only describe as profound ancient relief washed over me from the entity. The blue light in its core pulsed once, brightly, a silent and solemn acknowledgement of our pact. The dialogue was over. I now had a mission. It was time to go back to the surface and begin. I gave the great, silent being one last look, then turned and walked back toward the faint, distant light of the elevator, the weight of 2 worlds resting squarely on my shoulders.
The journey back up was a mirror of the descent, but the man on the platform was not the same one who had gone down. Before, I was a curiosity seeker, a man stumbling into a mystery. Now, I was an agent, a man with a purpose so profound it felt like a physical weight. I watched the walls of the ice shaft scroll past, the layers of ancient history now feeling like a preamble to the pact I had just made. My headlamp beam seemed brighter, more focused. The darkness below no longer felt like an abyss, but like a sanctuary I had sworn to protect. The faint, distant star of the station's light above was no longer just a destination, it was the first step of a critical path. My mind raced, replaying the information the archivist had given me. It wasn't a vague plan, it was a tactical briefing. Schematics, passwords, security blind spots, it had all been downloaded directly into my memory with perfect clarity. I saw the layout of the McMurdo server room as clearly as if I had stood in it myself. I knew the name of the night shift sysadmin who rarely left his station, and the location of a secondary data port behind a loose wall panel in the communications annex, a port with less monitoring. I knew the specific alphanumeric designation of the crate containing the Polaris 6 ice cores and its exact location in the cavernous deep freeze warehouse. The archivist had been a silent, passive observer for 30 years, and its understanding of the human world through our own electronic signals was terrifyingly complete. When the platform finally bumped to a halt at the top of the shaft, the change in atmosphere was jarring. The sterile, calm silence of the cavern was gone, replaced by the howl of the blizzard raging outside the station walls. The raw, chaotic violence of Earth's weather felt primitive, brutish after the profound stillness below. The pulse was gone too, or at least it was no longer a physical presence. But I could still feel it, a faint, reassuring hum in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of my mission. I am with you, it seemed to say. You are not alone. I used the chain hoist to lower the heavy steel hatch back into place. The finality of the act, the deep boom as it settled, felt like sealing a tomb or a promise. I quickly refastened the 8 massive bolts, my movements precise and efficient, no longer driven by curiosity, but by a cold, determined purpose. I had to erase every sign of my discovery. The station had to be exactly as I had found it, a forgotten, boring relic, a corporate spring cleaning project. I spent the next 2 days while the storm continued to rage, meticulously going about my original job. But now my work was a performance, a construction of the perfect alibi. I photographed every single item in Polaris 6, from the half-buried cargo containers outside to the last frozen beaker in the lab. I worked with a furious, obsessive energy, creating a digital paper trail so dense and boring that no one would ever have a reason to question it. The inventory log I was compiling would be a masterpiece of mundane detail, the perfect camouflage for the truth. During this time, I also did something else. Following the archivist's guidance, I used the station's old offline terminal to study the files it had pointed out. Deep in the station's local archive, I found the original, unredacted mission logs. I read the panicked, detailed notes of the station chief as his team's deep ice sensors first detected the sub-ice anomaly. I saw the raw seismic data that looked less like geology and more like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. I read their frantic theories: a geothermal pocket, a unique magnetic resonance. They were brilliant men, but their science had no framework for what they had found. It was the original echo, the one that had to be erased. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and a fragile, pale sunlight illuminated a world that had been remade in sculpted snow. My comms unit crackled to life. It was Fitzpatrick. "Polaris, this is McMurdo. We have you, Miles. Storm's past, you read?" His voice was a lifeline, but also a starting pistol. "Loud and clear, Mactown," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the cosmic truth weighing on my soul. "It was a big one. Station is fine. I've been keeping busy. The inventory is about 90% complete." "Good to hear," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. "We'll clear the traverse route. You should have a window to head back in 48 hours. How's the equipment looking out there?" It was my first test. "It's a junkyard, Fitz. Half this stuff is so corroded from ice creep it's not even worth salvaging. The prize is a set of old drill cores the Geo team left behind. They're flagged for deep freeze storage. I'll be bringing those back with me on the Cat." I said it casually, burying the most important cargo in a mountain of logistical jargon. "Roger that, Polaris. We'll have a spot waiting for them in the warehouse. Safe travels, Miles." "You too, Mactown." Polaris out. I stood up from the comms desk. Phase 1 was complete. I had established the narrative. I was the diligent contractor, finding some forgotten scientific samples that needed to be cataloged. No one would look twice. Now I had to go back to the lion's den, and I had to walk in with the keys to the cage, ready to set a secret free by burying it forever.
The 5-day journey back to McMurdo was the longest of my life. The Antarctic plateau was unchanged, a majestic, indifferent expanse of white and blue, but I saw it with new eyes.
It was no longer a blank spot on the map. It was a blanket, a shield, a tomb, and a cradle. My snowcat, which had once felt like a symbol of my isolation, now felt like a getaway car, a fragile shell carrying the most precious and dangerous cargo in existence. In the temperature-controlled cargo hold, secured with every strap I could find, was a crate containing several long cylindrical tubes. To anyone else, they were 30-year-old ice cores. To me, they were the last remaining echoes of a cosmic scream, and I was the only one who could silence them. My paranoia was a living thing, a passenger in the seat beside me. Every scheduled comms check with Fitzpatrick was a performance. I kept my voice flat, my reports boring, filling them with mind-numbing details about fuel consumption and Sastrugi field conditions. I reported that the old drill cores were stable, treating them as a minor scientific curiosity. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. Were they listening to more than just my words? Could they analyze my voice for stress patterns? The thought was absurd, but in this new reality, nothing seemed impossible. During the long, silent hours of driving, I felt the archivist. It wasn't a voice or a vision, but a quiet, constant presence in the back of my mind, like the warmth of a distant fire. It was a lifeline. I would close my eyes for a moment, picturing the vast dark chamber, the pulsing blue light, and I would focus on the plan. The schematics of McMurdo would appear in my mind's eye with perfect clarity. I saw myself walking the corridors, accessing the terminals, moving through the station not as myself, but as the ghost the archivist needed me to be. I was rehearsing for the biggest role of my life. When the familiar, chaotic smudge of McMurdo Station finally appeared on the horizon, I didn't feel relief. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was leaving the sanctuary of the empty wilderness and re-entering the world of witnesses, of security cameras, of rules and procedures I was about to systematically break. The noisy, industrial hum of the station was a stark contrast to the profound silence I had become accustomed to. People in parkas bustled past, their faces hidden, their minds full of their own mundane concerns, dinner, laundry, work orders. I felt utterly alien among them, a man walking in two worlds at once. Fitzpatrick met me at the vehicle depot, his face etched with the same weary professionalism. "Corrigan, good to see you back in one piece," he grunted, giving the snowcat a once-over. "Any trouble on the return?" "Smooth as ice," I lied, forcing a tired smile. "Just long. I've got the crate with those geocores ready for storage. Where do you want it?" "Deep freeze warehouse, sector Gamma 7. Talk to a kid named Simon. He'll log it for you," Fitzpatrick said, already turning his attention to a new shipment arriving on a sled. To him, I was just another task completed, another contractor off the books. It was the perfect cover. The deep freeze warehouse was a massive, windowless building that hummed with the constant drone of industrial cooling units. The air inside was so cold it felt thick. A young, fresh-faced technician with a tablet met me at the bay door. "Simon?" I asked. He nodded. "You're the guy from Polaris? Got some old rocks for us?" "Something like that," I said, watching as a small crane lifted the precious crate from my vehicle. "Just some 30-year-old ice. Handle with care, though. The geologists get fussy about sample integrity." I watched Simon scan the barcode I had printed for the crate, his tablet beeping in confirmation. He typed for a moment. "All right. Polaris VI Geocore samples 1989. Got it. I'll get it stored in its designated slot. You need a receipt?" "Just your signature on my transfer log." I handed him my own tablet. The casual, bureaucratic nature of the moment was surreal. I was handing over the only physical evidence of alien life on the planet, and the process was no different than signing for a shipment of frozen peas. He scribbled his name, and it was done.
The cores were inside. They were secure. And now they were accessible. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my narrow bunk in my small, featureless room in the contractor barracks. The noise of the station was a dull murmur through the walls. My job for the day was done. The physical evidence was contained, but the digital ghosts remained. I pulled out the heavy-duty tablet Fitzpatrick had given me, the one loaded with the inventory software. I powered it on, the screen casting a pale blue light on my face. The archivist had shown me how a backdoor in the inventory software's update protocol could be used to gain access to the station's core network. It was a high-risk, high-stakes gambit. A single mistake, a single anomalous data packet could trigger alarms and bring the whole station's security down on me. My heart pounded a steady, heavy rhythm in my chest. The first phase of the mission was over. The most dangerous was about to begin.
The barracks were quiet. Most of the station's personnel were either asleep or on shift, a rhythm of life dictated by the clock, not the sun which hung perpetually in the sky. In the pale blue glow of the tablet, my room felt like the cockpit of a deep space vessel on a silent, critical mission. My fingers moved across the screen, my actions not entirely my own. The archivist's knowledge guided me, a perfect map laid over the complex labyrinth of the station's network. I was no longer a simple contractor. I was a scalpel, poised to excise a dangerous memory from the mind of a sleeping giant. I initiated the connection through the software backdoor. Code scrolled past on the screen, a language I didn't understand but navigated with an instinct that wasn't mine. I bypassed the first firewall, then the second. My heart beat a steady, slow rhythm, a human echo of the pulse I had left behind, deep beneath the ice. I was a ghost, slipping through digital walls, my presence nothing more than a flicker of anomalous data that went unnoticed among the terabytes of scientific information flowing through the station's veins every hour. I found the server, USAP Archive 7. It was just a name on a screen, but it felt like a vault. Inside, after slicing through layers of archaic encryption, I found the folders. Polaris IV Geodata 1989. My breath caught. I opened a file. It was a seismic chart, a perfect rhythmic sine wave labeled anomalous, high amplitude, low frequency resonance. The heartbeat. I saw geological survey notes describing the unnatural glassy composition of the deep ice. I saw the original, unredacted reports from the station chief. Files so sensitive they were flagged for level 7 clearance, files that had been buried for 30 years. It was all there, the complete, undeniable proof. For a heartbeat, the archivist in me, the part that respected data and history, hesitated. I was about to destroy the single greatest discovery in human history. But then, I felt a faint echo of the archivist's terror, the image of the geometric, light-consuming void. This wasn't history. It was an unexploded bomb. My resolve hardened. I initiated the White Protocol, not a simple deletion, but a military-grade overwrite that would scrub the data and replace it with meaningless, random noise. A progress bar appeared on my screen. 1%, 2%. It was agonizingly slow. Every percentage point was a lifetime. I sat there, motionless in the dark, watching the evidence of a god in the ice dissolve into meaningless static. When it was finally done, the folder was an empty shell. I logged out, severing the connection and wiping the local cache from my own tablet. The first echo was gone, but the original scream remained in the cylinders of ice stored in warehouse Gamma 7. My next move was planned with the same alien precision. I used my logistics credentials to access the station's work order system. I created a new Priority Zero order: decontamination and disposal of pre-1991 cryo-core samples. The description was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense I'd cooked up with the archivist's help.
citing obscure clauses in the Antarctic Treaty about potential microbial contamination. The order assigned the task to the only person with the clearance and proximity, me. And the disposal location was the geothermal waste shaft, a massive concrete platform with a circular shaft in the center, a gaping mouth leading down to the planet's core. A shimmering heat rose from it, warping the air. I maneuvered the crate onto the platform's hydraulic lift. I checked the manifest one last time. Everything was in order. With a press of a button, the lift tilted, and the crate, containing the only proof of life beyond Earth, slid silently over the edge and vanished into the searing heat below. I didn't hear it land. There was only the low hum of the station's power grid. Back in my room, I completed the final step. I logged the work order as complete, then deleted the order itself from the system. In the eyes of the network, it had never happened. The ice cores had never been moved. They had simply ceased to exist in the records. The trail was cold. The echoes were silenced. I sat on my bunk, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion. And then I felt it one last time. It was not a thought, not a vision. It was a feeling of pure, untainted peace. A wave of gratitude that washed over me, so profound and ancient, it felt like a blessing from a star. It was a silent thank you. And then, for the first time since I'd stepped into that station, the background hum in my mind went quiet. The connection was severed. The archivist was asleep, safe in the silence I had bought for it. I was alone again, but the loneliness no longer felt empty. My last few months on the ice were a blur of routine. I completed my contract. Fitzpatrick signed my completion bonus, calling me one of the most efficient, no-fuss contractors he'd ever had. I boarded the C-130 and left Antarctica, not looking back. I didn't take another remote job. The money no longer mattered. The detachment I had cultivated my whole life was gone, replaced with a deep, secret connection to the world. I moved to a quiet town, surrounded by trees and green, living things. My life became small, simple, and mundane. But sometimes, on a clear day, I'll find myself in a park, sitting on a bench, and I'll look up at the vast, blue sky. No one would look twice at me. I'm just a guy who used to move boxes, a ghost. But I know what's really out there in the deep dark, and I know what's sleeping soundly under a continent of ice at the bottom of the world. I am the guardian of that silence. And some nights, I think if I listen hard enough, I can still feel the faint, slow, steady heartbeat of a hidden God, and I know that I'm not alone at all.